My name is Chris Poteet. I'm the UX consultant with Portal Solutions on the East Coast of the States, and yeah, we do SharePoint. So today I want to talk about usability testing. So if I'm good to go, Jamis, I will go ahead and get started. So I'll go ahead and get started. And this talk is just bordering on an hour, so I'm actually going to expedite some of it a little bit, and we'll see in the end if I can actually show you my demonstration, how the video works through WebEx. So we'll see how that goes. But I'll just go ahead and get started and move through the core of it, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So like Jimmy said, I'm here to talk about usability testing. Specifically, why aren't we doing it in the SharePoint realm in a lot of projects? To outline some reasons why I think that is the case, some reasons why I think you should be including it, and then hopefully at the end I'll be able to show you an actual usability test and how to do analysis on them. So first, what is usability testing? Steve Krug wrote a book, and a great one, actually two of them, on testing, usability testing, and this is his definition, where one user at a time is shown something, whether it's a website, a prototype of a site, or some sketches of individual people, and asked to either figure out what it is or try to use it to do a typical task. So you'll find later in my questions, I'm going to focus on, in my test, about trying to accomplish tasks, and we want to watch them, seeing how that actually occurs inside the test. So with that definition in mind, let's go ahead and get into some of the reasons why aren't we doing it. One, I think, big issue and stumbling block for a lot of people in this project is perceived costs. Normally, although SharePoint projects can get very large, we're still clamoring for a lot of time to fit money into the budget. Imagine if you're doing a big BI solution with John, for instance. That's a big project and brings a lot of value, but in the process, you have to make decisions. And so I think a lot of people don't have it in the forefront of their minds when I'm doing this kind of application development because of costs that they don't do usability testing. I think there's just a perception that usability testing is an expensive overhead to all projects, and as a result, many people just cut it out of or don't even consider it seriously. I think another one related to that is time. Obviously, time is money in the consulting world, and for a PM that spends a lot of time using Microsoft Project, which to me is an abomination to work with, I'm glad I don't have to, but nonetheless, they're still looking at timelines and saying, we have to get this done, and to commit this amount of time to it, they think that this is going to be a week or 2 weeks or an extensive amount of time that has to go into get usability testing done and to get results from it. But the truth is that it's actually quite the opposite. You can do it in a very quick and cheap way, cheap in quotes, depending on how you want to do it, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. I think another one is just misinformation. People are just generally misunderstand what is no one would say, I don't want my site to be usable. We understand it at least on that level. We have that frame of reference, but not a lot of us understand what really goes through the process of usability testing. What does a qualified usability expert actually bring to the table when they come into these projects, and how can it really help my project, and more specifically my clients, adopt this SharePoint solution? The misinformation, cost, and time are three big reasons why it gets left out of a lot of projects. So, now, keeping that in mind, what are some things that why we should actually be doing usability testing? Now, I think it's more than just the obvious to increase the usability of our product. One thing is to verify content utility. So Amazon is a great example that lives and breathes off its content and its e-commerce functions. Now, if Amazon was not regularly, and I know this for a fact that they're very good at this, if they weren't regularly and iteratively testing through the utility of their content, by utility I mean that the content they're actually coming up with, what a content strategist would do, is actually serving the needs of the customers. So a great thing to do in a usability test is saying, is the content that the client or we have created with the client is actually serving the needs of whatever our audience may be? And since at the end of the day, what we're learning more and more with ubiquitous computing devices like smartphones and tablets and refrigerator computers, etc., is that at the end of the day, our job as information managers and implementators is to make sure that the information is conveyed and it's utilized in the way that the customer needs to be able to use it. That's what it's about. It's about content and serving its utility. So usability testing provides you a great avenue to test that. Another thing that's very intertwined with it is testing information architectures. Content and information architecture are obviously different in some senses, but very similar in other senses as well. Obviously, information architecture is really what I like to think of the skeletal system, and the actual content that you're using is more of the organs that, again, to put everything on, and then the interface itself is the skin. So that's how I think of the different layers of the designing UX applications. So we need to be able to ensure that our information architectures are meeting that need. So, for instance, we go through card sorting exercises and we come up with these labels for our navigation, or we want to test these layouts versus another layout. We want to do A/B testing, which is basically showing someone two different variations of something, which one serves the needs of the user better. That's an example of quick usability testing. So testing content and information architectures are very, very important. And in addition to making sure that our content is serving a utility and our information architecture gets us to that content, we still have business objectives. At the end of the day, we still have a reason that our clients are coming to us to use SharePoint or another content management system to accomplish some kind of goal. No one goes out and does $1 million SharePoint project just because they want to say that they do SharePoint. Right? They have things that they want to accomplish, whether that be on the public side or intra-extranet side, whatever it may, or business intelligence side, whatever it may be. So usability testing is a great way to cut through that and be sure that our actual business goals are being accomplished with the application that we're working on. And another thing that I think is really great, I don't think this is the primary reason that you should do usability testing, but I think it's a great example of how usability testing can be useful, is that it really cuts through a lot of the debates that happen. I don't know how many of you have said in a meeting where we're trying to design by committee, whether intentional or unintentionally, and there's a lot of groupthink going on, and we find ourselves discussing whether the navigation should have a green background or a blue background, when really, what is the focus? What are we really trying to accomplish? And I'll tell you what, when we spend hours debating those little things, and then you get a user in front of an application for a usability test, and you find out they can't even find your information, then all of a sudden you're not worried about colors anymore. You're worried about much more important things. So that, I think, it settles debates. So you can actually say, I think this would work better. I think this would work better. And Steve Krug talks about, everyone talks about that they're the fictional user. They impress upon their own desires as users to develop applications. It just cuts through all of that and says, this works and this does not. So I think that's an important side effect of doing proper usability testing. And I think one of the last things to keep in mind is that as you do usability testing iteration after iteration, project after project, it starts to give you perspective on actually doing implementations. Now, as you start to do usability testing, you begin to really build up a treasure of knowledge, if I can say that, of what things work and what things don't. So when you come down further down the line, you're doing a new information architecture for a client, you're doing new content strategy for a client, or you're developing a new interface, whatever it may be, you say, I know from my past that this works and this doesn't, and it helps you expedite that, and the more you hone that, the better you get as, you don't even have to be a full-fledged usability consultant or user experience lead on your business card to get a lot of benefit from seeing these exams and really molding your approach to application development. So I think long-term it really helps you get a perspective, and it'll help you analyze other things well. I can't tell you how many times I've ran usability tests on my own mind about just things out in the world, from elevators to cars and devices, just because you think it really changes your paradigm on how you approach not just SharePoint, but a lot of different things in the world around you as well. So that's my big thing. It gives you really expands your worldview in a lot of different ways. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of how usability testing can actually happen, because there's not a monolithic one-way approach to doing usability testing. Depending on your cost requirements, your project requirements, whatever you want to have it in mind, there's different ways to approach it. So if you can think of a grid of 4 panels, which I should actually put this in the slide someday, there's 2 different ways to look at it. There's one way is how the test is actually ran with the person running the test. Okay, so that means moderated versus unmoderated. So what this means is, in a moderated test, a participant is actually guided by a present moderator. So the usability person running the test will actually physically be in the same locale, same room as the person running the test. Now, the other way you can think about running it is you can also run unmoderated or self-moderated tests. This is where you don't actually be in their same locale, but they're given a task list and they're allowed to work alone, and you record. In both instances, you record them, but it becomes particularly important in an unmoderated test. So one way, are you present or are you not present? And there's variations of this too that can cross over when you consider the other side of it as well. And that is, in addition to being moderate or unmoderated, there's also local versus remote. So a local is in the same room as the moderator. So you can see when something's moderated and local, like I said, they're in the same room physically together. Now the other flip side is remote, okay? So a remote is where you do a test with them, but they can do it on their own time or over remote technology. So let's think about it like this, if we can go back here. So let's say I'm in a project that's in a little bit of a time crunch, but I want to use some usability testing. I don't have the time to bring in users for my test. I want to just grab some people that are from disparate locations and I'll give them a task list, and they record themselves doing it, and then I can do analysis. That would be a remote, unmoderated test. Now let's say I do have the time and I want to do that. I want to actually be in the room. Then we can have a local moderated test. So, and there's even variations of this as well. I can actually do a moderated test over Skype or over GoToMeeting. So just so you know, there's not one way to look at how to run usability testing. If you have the time and you have the interest to do a moderated test that's local, you can do that. Or you can do the unmoderated version. Now the example I hope to show you later is actually an unmoderated remote one. It's actually self-moderated. So I think of them the same way. So I give the user a list of questions, and they work through it at their own pace, and I watch the video afterwards and do analysis on it. So you'll see that kind of variation between them. One thing is, why would I choose one over the other? That's one question that I get a lot. I think the reason, the best kind of usability testing, you'll always get the best kind if you do a moderated test. And the reason for that is because when you're actually interacting with a user in a moderated fashion, not only are you giving them the task or questions you would in a self-moderated test, but when they make a decision or they seem confused, you can actually interact with them and get more feedback out of them. If you're just recording them and they're doing it on their own, they might not give you a level of detail that you're looking for. You have to follow up afterwards. So if you have the ability to do moderated, it's the best way to do it. And same to do something local. If I can be in the same room with someone, the utopia of usability design, I will be in the same room watching them, having interactions with them while they do the test. We don't live in a utopian world, so I find that doing a lot of this self-moderated remote tests, and I'll talk about tools for doing this, you can get a lot of benefit and don't have to go through the cost of being with a user. So yeah, there are different options. Or let's say I'm on a project and I'm actually in Kentucky and my client is actually in Florida. I can hop on GoToWebinar, Skype, whatever, record the session and do a moderated remote. So there are definitely pros and cons to each one of them. It's just a matter of balancing which one you want. Okay, so let's talk about some tools for usability testing, how you can do it. Like I said, we're going to go through some just real quickly. I've already talked to some of them. Let's say you want to do a moderated remote. You can use Skype or live meetings so you can walk through them and record it while you're actually there and don't have to be in the same physical location. Let's say you wanted to do a moderated and local test. There are two types of tools, one made by TechSmith, who I believe makes Snagit, which I use. And they have a tool called Moray. There's one that's a desktop Windows application. Another one on the right is called Silverback, and that's a Mac application. And both of them allow you to record their facial expressions as well as what they're doing on the screen and all that they're saying. So it allows you to do that. So if you're able to be in their same location, you can use these apps. Moray is, I believe, around $1,000, and Silverback is less than $100. Moray is definitely designed specifically for a larger type of feature set, but both are really great for that. So that's an option for you right there, one of those two. And $1,000 can be consumed pretty easily over several projects. So I think that's a good investment if you're in Windows and want to go that route. There's other tools you can use that are unmoderated and remote, meaning you're going to let someone else walk through questions that you specify, and I'm not in the same location. the site that I like the most, I don't work for user testing, but I like them the best. I actually just ran a new test this morning that I'm going to do some analysis this afternoon using user testing. I like them. They go in, you fill out the questions, your scenario, and follow-up questions, and they record everything that the user goes through and then all the answers to their questions. So I like them. Open Hallway is a little more expensive, but lets you do similar type of things. And both of these users allow you to use outsourced users, or you can use your own. So those are good options for either of those. So you can use the technologies of the platform and allow them to use their interfaces and all the way they handle it and still use your own users. So those are options. User testing is, I believe it's like $40 a test if you pay the user. If you use your own, you can do it for $29. So $29 a test is a pretty good cost to benefit once you actually start doing your usability testing. One other thing that I have not amended to this presentation is if you want to do mobile types of testing, user testing now supports unmoderated and remote iPad, iPhone, Android kind of testing. But I actually have not done yet in person testing a local and moderated test using one of those devices. So I'm hoping to do that kind of soon. But most likely you're going to get more benefit out of local testing for using devices like that because recording them and seeing their interactions are very different than a computer screen. So, so I need to add that to a slide for future presentations of this. So how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm flying through this. Good. So now let's talk about putting together a sample usability test. I want you to see the nitty-gritty of what it actually looks like. And so here are the things that you need to think about when you're designing a usability test. First of all, the best people that are going to be able to produce effective usability tests are people that have been all along the project since you're envisioning and been a part of some of your business analysis. And the reason, and even some of your IA and content strategy work, the reason for that is because they're going to be able to understand specifically what the goals are for the organization that you're implementing it for, because you want to target your usability testing because you don't want to have 50 questions in a usability test. You want to be specific in them. You can iterate over different questions, but you want to be specific. So what are the specific needs my client has that I need to focus on in my test? So maybe they installed, for instance, this new custom widget on their website, and they really want to make sure it's important to them that the time they put into this is going to be effective. So you can do early testing on a wireframe, for instance, sit in front of the user, and then later as they actually get the application implemented. And because you know the activities that they want to center, or that they want to concentrate on, as well as the content, that's going to make good usability test questions. And I'll show you an example of that. Next thing you want to do is you want to create the test questions. Seems pretty obvious. I'm going to walk through some sample questions, and they are all based on what are the specific interactions and content that I want to focus on that are most important to the stakeholders that I'm working with. And next, you need to find participants. Obviously, you can't have a usability test without someone to do it. So you definitely do not want to get someone on your team that you're working with implementing to do usability testing. That is never a good idea. Nor is it really a good idea to have someone who's intimately acquainted with what's going on in your project. It's definitely better to find people who are on the outside, but in a related area to you that will understand the verbiage of your site or your intranet or whatever it may be. So what really contributed a lot to this perception of time and cost for usability testing is that, let's say I'm doing a site for clothing for moms in a certain age group from 25 to 35. So people thought the only people I can use in my usability test is a married woman, 25 to 35, who lives in North Carolina and has at least 2.5 children. So you can spend all this time being super, super specific in the kind of people, and if you have the time to do that, then more power to you, but most of us do not. You can find people who are on the fringe of some of those requirements or even outside of them, maybe by age. You give a little bit of tolerance in that, and you can find people a lot easier, and you don't need to spend a lot of time finding participants. It's much better to find 5 participants that are close to the demographic you're trying to shoot for than none at all. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Don't be conscious of your participants and who's going to take a part in it, but don't spend so much time that you get lost in the weeds of trying to do it. Another thing about your test is a process point, and that is to test early and often. If you are coming near the end of the implementation of your project, let's say you're going live a week later, and then all of a sudden the PM says, hey, we have a slot on our Gantt chart for usability testing, let's run some. By that point, it's too late. I would say skip the usability testing in this session, come back in phase 2 and redo it. Because at that point, you're opening more of a can of worms and you're going to help in that timeline. What would have been a much better practice is to start much earlier in the process. So even as the information architect and the content strategies are working on wireframes or content strategy briefs or style guides or compositions, through all that process you do small iterative testing. And by small, I mean most usability testing, if you go over 3 to 5 people, definitely 5 people in a test, you're not going to really see a lot of value past that. Steve Krug in his book suggests about 5 people, and in my experience, that is the best number just in practice to get. Once you go to 10, 15, you're probably not going to see the value for the time extra that you're putting on top of that. But just remember to test early and often throughout the process so you have checkpoints and it becomes a part of your process as you move through implementation. So let's talk now about a sample usability test. So I am going to air out some of my dirty laundry a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a site that I worked on with Portal Solutions. The site was great. We didn't do any usability testing in the early part of the project, but we made changes after the fact. And so that would have been an example. Don't try and do it at the last minute. Come back in subsequent phases and make, if it comes down to that kind of timeline decision. But the website is called AUSA, or Association of the United States Army. And so they're a group, kind of a lobbying group, fraternal for people that are currently a part of the Army, veterans, and they run these chapters that allow you to take part in events for the Army. So it's kind of a social networking news for people that want to be involved in all kinds of areas of Army life. And so we came in, and actually this was the first project I worked on at Portal Solutions, so now over 2 years ago. So it's on Moss right now. We did a lot for them. I mean, we rebuilt their chapter system, their calendaring systems. The UI is completely customized, as you'll get a chance to see. So there's a lot to look at and a lot to test. And specifically, there's a lot of content. So knowing what they needed to test allowed me to build a test for them that was very targeted. So remember I mentioned content emphasis. What are things that they really wanted to focus on? Well, there were 3 things that stood out. One was conferences. They have this annual conference and these other mini types of conferences. They want to be sure that users can find them. And, oh, I see, I'll talk to Jumis about questions in a second. So conferences was very important to them. So I want to be sure my usability tests highlight them. News, particularly headline news, was important to them, so that's another area. So they want to be sure that users can find out about the conferences and news related to AUSA as a whole. But they're still a membership organization, so they want to be sure that people who come can find out what are the benefits of joining AUSA. Why should I pay money to be a part of this organization? So they want to be sure that that is easy to find as well. So those 3 content emphasis were a grid for me to look at some of my actual questions. So let's talk about tasks for a second. Jimmy's asked a good question. How many questions should you have on a usability test? So there, again, is no fixed number, same with participants. You could technically have as many as you wanted. However, keep in mind that you still have someone who is working through a site for the first time and is prone to a level of frustration and anxiety, especially if you're doing local tests and you have someone looking over your shoulder. I generally try and stay between the 5 to 10 range on the task questions. I believe this one has 7 or so. We'll find out in a second when I advance the slide. I don't remember offhand. But generally that's where I like to go because, again, remember, you do this iteratively. So you choose 5 to 6 things that you want to test early on. And then you come back later and you choose 5 to 6 different ones, or maybe questions that you did earlier, and you just do it iteratively. So I think the magic number for participants in a test is somewhere around 5, with the presupposition you're doing it iteratively, and the questions as well is between 5 to 10. So here are some of the tasks I have in my website. Someone is, I hear keyboard clicking. Okay, maybe no one's talking. Okay, so here are some of the user tasks. First one, the chapters was very important to them, so they need to find a chapter close to them. So notice also when I write the question that it's also something that's personalized. It's not just find a chapter, because they need to be able to apply their own context to the actual question. That's what makes a good usability test. No one comes to a website and says, I need to find it. Just generally, I'm just going to find a chapter of AUSA. No, they have a context to them. They have something that is close to them. So it allows the user to take their own context, be it location, age, preferences, and apply it to how does your content and your IA actually work. So that was my question, finding something close. Let me click here. So again, what does AUSA do and what services do they provide? So it's a very important content question for them. I want them to be able to find this annual meeting, which is the conference I talked about. Let's find a schedule. Be sure you can find out what's going on. The benefits of a membership. It's a straightforward question, but I want them to be able to see if they can find that. This was a big concern of mine when we did the original, because as you do this UX throughout the project, there are going to be things that naturally come up and you say, I want to test that. Well, their contact page was just littered with names, and so I knew I needed to ask this tester, if I have a question about memberships or just AUSA in general, what's my one-stop shop place to get information? So, and you'll see, hopefully in the usability test we'll play through, that becomes a point of contention for the user. So I want to be specific because one of the most fundamental tasks, and I have gotten into arguments with people who want to argue against me, but time and time again, it ends up being the fact, especially if you're doing public websites, one of the most integral tasks that you need to do, and this is a little bit of a rant, is that you have to be able to make sure that if anything comes along the line, whether you're selling something, whether you're trying to persuade something of a user, you have to be sure that there's some line of communication between that user and your actual organization. So by that I mean clear and distinct contact pages, how people contact you, are there any other mechanisms to do that? So it's very important to be sure that your public website, and I think in the initial design for AUSA, it needed some massaging, which we'll see. And so again, another conference question, slightly different to annual meeting, but it's essentially the same thing. So it's just, again, personalizing a little bit, what is something that interests them. So let's look at a video. So what we're going to try and do, Jamise, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this, okay? So I don't know if my computer audio will, ideally it'll come through GoToMeeting. That's the goal. If not, then I will just narrate over it. So I'm going to go ahead and play this in a second. But just so you know, this is the interface that a tester sees on usertesting.com. They open up, they have a desktop application. It shows them the questions, the task, the time, it lets them go through that. And then they just self-pace themselves through the test. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question, and we'll see if audio actually plays through it or not.
Should I hear something now?
Yeah, you don't hear anything?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to narrate it for you, okay?
Okay.
So let's go ahead and start this. So you'll see the first question to this user. And by the way, I have all this. This video is actually on my blog. I have a blog post where you can actually watch the whole video yourself if you're interested, and you can hear her narrations. But what we're doing is we're watching her try and find the most important thing for the first question is that find a chapter. So she was able to successfully discover the mega menu and actually find the link. She's actually just talking through all her different options. Now let me pause this right here. This is an unintended discovery that I did not think that I would find in this usability test. We built this tool to help them refine based on location and also Army installations country to find chapters that are close to them. So I want you to watch how she tries to use this, and she makes a comment I wish you can hear, but I'll actually just tell you what she says here in a second. So she's looking by California, and then she says something here. She's like, okay, I see all these results by California, but there's a big problem here. How do I know what is actually close to me? Because remember, that was the question, find something that was close to her. So she makes a really insightful comment here saying, this doesn't tell me what is what here. So She then, as most users try and do, they assume it's their fault. It's most users you'll find will not assume that it's the website's fault. Only after an extensive amount of frustration do they come to that conclusion. First, they'll make a conclusion that they did something wrong, and you'll see this user. She'll say, "Oh, maybe I did something wrong." Then she actually backs up in a second, and she tries a different mode to search down by results. And this, you think, would provide very different results for her. She's actually near San Diego. She's trying to do it. But you see her go back. Now she puts in her zip code. So now you think, hey, this is going to be able to really show me some specific results. So she puts in her zip code and hits go. And then she gets the exact same result set. So basically what ended up happening is that even though there were different interactions to find different chapters, she did not get a different presentation results. There's nothing here that helped her trigger down on what she was actually looking for. So then she reiterates that comment saying, hey, it doesn't tell me. It would be nice to know if this had, if it filtered and showed me how far from my zip code it was. So this is a great insight, and we made changes to it based on this. So she goes back and forth. You see what she's having to do now. Because our interface did not give her the means to find or to filter on how far something is, she's forced to go back and forth and try and find something, which is something we never want. Let's go ahead and skip forward to number 2. So this is pretty straightforward. She's just trying to say, you know, what does AUSA? But she actually ends up finding something very interesting here, okay? My question to her was, what does AUSA do and what services do they provide? Now, I don't know if you noticed what happened in this website, but if you were to go back to the beginning part of this video, you'll notice that the top navigation is actually different between a chapter site, which is what she's in, versus the global navigation. And what this has led is the user to say, hey, I want to know what AUSA does. So I clicked on the About Us page, but what it really was, there were 2 sins created. First of all, we messed with global navigation, which is never, ever a good idea. So providing contextual navigation is one thing, but to mess with global navigation is a completely different thing. And the second thing is this page is completely blank. This is a live site, and so she now has no idea what's going on. So she actually ends up, this is actually more intelligent user than most of us we would find, because these people do this professionally. I mean, they get paid $10 a test to do this. So she actually plays around for a little bit. She goes back home. She realizes she's in the wrong site, and she goes back to the main navigation and finally does end up finding the About Us page. But our navigation has committed a cardinal sin in user experience land of changing it on her and giving her unintended results. So you see she goes back here and she actually ends up finding the About Us page. So let me flip to the next task. So she spends a lot of time. She actually gives good feedback on how the content is structured. I like the bullet points. I like the headers. So that's good feedback too. It's not all negative in the usability test. You get a lot of positive stuff as well. So let me scroll ahead to question 3. She does this for a little while. So now she's trying to locate a schedule. Let me go back for a recent meeting. So she's in the About Us page, and she tries to now use the contextual navigation in the left nav, which has done a good job for her. It's expanded, showed her what's available here. So now she's trying to find a schedule, but she's having trouble finding something that's really recent. So she actually makes the determination based on this landing page for meetings that this is the best result. It actually ended up being the best result for her. So this proves that, at least in one case, that it works. Well, let me stop this. But I would want to test this with multiple users. So that's one thing. Just because it works for one doesn't mean it's going to work for all of them. I've had times where one user passed the test completely fine, which is why using a single user is never enough. But 4 other times they fail it. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, again, I'm trying to sell memberships here. That's what AUSA is doing. So they want to find memberships. So she actually found it very quickly. She contextualized it to herself. She knows she's an individual person. And then she actually ends up finding the link as well. And she did this all using the left-hand navigation. Now, if I was moderating this test, I would want to ask her, why did you start using the left-hand navigation? If I probed her, I would assume it's because the global navigation has let her down already. So she's going with something that is not going to give her the same level of, level of difficulty that global nav did. But she successfully maneuvered using the left-hand navigation. So again, she talks about, I like it, I like the results, I like the way the text is formatted, it's very clear, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here is another big one. So I asked her, what phone number would I use to ask questions? I could have asked about a membership or some other thing to give more context to it. She immediately goes for the contact us, which is good. It's in a prominent location. Then you'll see the results that she actually ends up getting. So this is what she's presented with. She's presented with this incredible list of numbers, and she actually lets out a small moan when she opens the page. She's like, I have no idea who to call. So she actually goes for a little while long, I'm skip forward, of guessing who she's going to call. So this, we failed her big time in developing this contact us information. So this is essentially a phone directory that is much better in an intranet context than a public website one. So I'm going to skip ahead. There are some little notes you'll see in my test that she actually ends up finding it. You see what she did there? She actually got so confused. She is a more savvy user, so she went to the footer and said, maybe it's in the footer. And she did find a global number, and she said, that's the number I would call. So at least the footer didn't let her down in this particular instance. So let's go to the last question. So she's looking for a conference right now. So she's looking, and one thing that confused her is the meetings versus conference kind of language. So she actually doesn't find anything meeting-wise. So she actually then goes to search here in a second. So let her go ahead and do that. Oh, 1 second. Okay, so she starts looking. Let me forward to when she actually searches on something. So now she's searching. So now, and notice there are two, if you're not familiar with this, in web interaction design, just general wayfinding, which is a term for how you find information, there's two ways you can find information, either by search or by navigation, particularly in the web kind of sphere. So the navigation has not given her what she wants, so now she defaults to search. Some users do completely the opposite. We live in a very Google-fied kind of economy, technology economy, where we just instantly, some just default to search, some do navigation, but we need to be sure both work well depending on the preferences of the user. So now she goes and searches for conference. And so she inputs her result, go, and then she gets some results here. And so you'll see all the results, and she tries to go down a little bit. She finds this commander's conference, and she assumes that that's, you know, one that interests her, and she ends up choosing. So that's it. She goes and talks about some of the details of it, a little more into meetings. And then she talks through each of these questions. So these are the questions that I asked. You can see the scenario, the questions, and then she actually, at the very end of the test, does my follow-up questions. I forget what they were off the top of my head, but again, this video is available on my blog that I'll give you a link to that you can check out if you want to actually watch the exam. So let's go back and view, yeah, Shift F5, right? Okay. I'm not a PowerPoint MVP, so you'll have to bear with me. So we viewed the video. Okay, so we've talked through some different results there. So here were some of her comments. She couldn't find a city for all the results like I showed. Same results showed up on those different interactions. The About Us page for the chapter was blank. She was lost in the chapter sites. She never found a schedule. She was overwhelmed with the directory, no main number. She found the main number. But she makes the comment, once she makes that search for the conference, she's like, I don't know how to get here. So she was confused there. So now it's a matter of making suggestions, because it's not enough to just create questions and ask. Now, what are our actionable items from this? What do we act on? And so here were the things that we actually decided. We're going to add city to chapter results. When you search by zip code, we're going to order by distance away. So it'll say, this zip code is the closest. Here are the remaining distance in miles from where you searched from. In chapter sites, use that global navigation and move that ancillary navigation into something different. So there was an interaction that I didn't show you. There was a link that actually listed chapter activities that she clicked on, and it took her back to that chapter search page. She was confused about it. So if you watch the video, you can see that as well. We're going to add the main number contact to content page, remove that needlessly long list, and be more focused in it. And you'll notice in conference, it showed me something that SharePoint allows you to meet, because you can add a synonym for conference for meeting, so we know in this case we're talking about them synonymously, and we can possibly include a best bet as well that says when I search for conference, here is an item for them. So that allows you to use obviously what provides you in SharePoint and match that to a usability test result. So that test was $39. I was able to do that and get all that power-packed punch out of it. And that could save me tons of time, money, and user headache down the road, and hopefully increase conversions as well when we identify these types of issues. So that was using user testing, but again, remember there are lots of different variations of ways you can do it, how you're comfortable. And I also want to encourage you, don't feel like you have to be a usability expert to be able to run these tests. It's just a matter of practice, and when you become more and more familiar with the mechanisms and tools available to you, it'll become more natural to you to be able to do it. So I suggest you get into it, be an evangelist in your organization, in your consulting company, whatever it may be, to be able to do this, and you'll really come out as a champion of users. And I think it's an absolutely essential addition to any of what any of us are doing on this phone call today, to be sure that we're creating usable, business-oriented, and goal-satisfying applications, because that is our goal. So, again, my Twitter name there, if you feel so inclined to follow me and hear me rant about SharePoint Designer occasionally, and my blog. I'll actually get up the link real fast where you can watch the video if you want. I think if any of you are interested, I would suggest you watch the video. It's only 15 minutes or so, and to make more sense to my suggestions. The slides are there, as well as I basically I recorded this whole talk myself in the hour-long fashion and put it on Vimeo, so if you wanted to reference it. But so that's it. That's all I got. I'll find out that link and share it with all of you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. That was actually very, very, very good. I didn't see any other questions coming through. At least I don't think so. But if there are questions, we would love to hear them. I guess one of my questions is that when you said that you should test often and early and often, right, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question to you is that when you say often, like, what would you say is like why would you continue to test after you've already tested, or when would you test again?
Yeah, usually the testing I've done are a couple different reasons. The first of all might be because we feel like we need more results. So I do 5 people and say we really want to do a couple more. But I think more importantly, there are milestones along the UX process. So for instance, I do wireframes. I test with 3 to 5 people. Then I come along to design comps, show them to 3 to 5 people. Then I actually come to implementation, and I do it 3 to 5 people. So it's more along milestones in the development of your application than anything else. And if you decide you need more people, then you can add more people as you see fit throughout the process.
Okay. There was another question coming in from Peter, and it was, do you think the time boxing the usability phase is a good idea?
Do you think what was that, time boxing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for the question.
It's right above Daniel's question. Daniel has a follow-up question too, but Peter sent his just right before.
Can you ask? I don't know what he means by time boxing.
Okay, let me see. Peter, I'm not sure if I can unmute you. Let me see if are you there?
Yes,
Peter?
I am.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The question is, say, when we're doing the usability testing, to say, like, right, we're going to do this in 3 days. Whatever we get out of 3 days, this is what we're going to go live with, else it's phase 2.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can. I mean, it's, there's not a formula. I'm giving you an approach to do it iteratively over and over again, but, I mean, again, remember this project that I'm showing you, we didn't do any on it. So even doing something like that is better than, what we did. So I think you can. I can say, we're going to dedicate this amount of time. This is what we're going to get out of it. You're still going to get a ton of benefit. So if by time boxing you mean limiting to a certain amount of time, then you can do that. If you're going to do that, then definitely you want to be your usability testings. The testing you do might be a little more complex because you're trying to test more, but you can certainly do it.
Right.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. Another question from Daniel, which says, could we incorporate usability testing with functional use case testing? I think you might iron out similar issues described in the presentation.
Yeah. So, yeah, use cases are definitely often a reason to discover some of that content emphasis. So they're related. Same with user stories. So if you can use, kind of the agile, you're doing the user stories, and then the use cases come off the user stories, then they're really intertwined. In fact, I don't know what other testing you might be doing of use cases, because the primary example, I think, of doing use case testing really manifests itself best in usability testing. So, because a use case really just is describing in detail how a user story is accomplished. So, like for instance, my user story, I, as a secretary, need to be able to upload documents for whatever reason, if I remember the format of it. And then use cases flesh out how that works. And so those can form the backbone to your usability questions. So they're very related. So you can see how a business analyst, a talented business analyst, and a user experience person need to work really well together. And there's actually a growth in a position of a UX-flavored BA that I'm growing into. So, so yes, they're very intertwined, and they have to be.
Great. This is a comment/question from Joseph, who says, who was conducting the test? The errors that were captured should have been caught and addressed before end-user testing.
Who was conducting the testing?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one of the mistakes we learned, right? We did internal vetting of meeting requirements, because we were worried in the project, are we meeting the requirements that are the use cases that are necessary for the project? So it was all internal. So people were familiar with, I know that this chapter is close to me. I don't know this chapter is close to me. So it wasn't solved in that initial testing. So yeah. So do not try. That's why I said earlier, do not think you can do usability testing on people that are engaged in the project in any meaningful way, because it's not going to give you the results you need.
Very smart. Any other questions for Chris? Here. It's interesting that you say, because you wouldn't, I don't think that I would think of that initially. Like, I would think I would test the people that were close to the project, but obviously because they know their way around it, it's not as easy for someone who has no basis on the site at all. Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, now you do, again, when you find these participants, like for instance, the best participants for my AUSA test would have been, like for instance, I go out and find a veteran, an Army veteran, or someone that has some kind of, the user testing, this lady who did it obviously had no vested interest in AUSA. So that's just one of the pitfalls of potentially using an unmoderated tool like user testing. So you definitely want some kind of context, but if you have, for instance, the project manager trying to do, test the site to make sure it works according to what the requirement's done, they understand the implementation, so they're not going to be able to discover issues for users. That's why usability testing is so illuminating. I think it's just the best way to cut through a lot of that stuff and just say, this is what works and this doesn't.
Excellent.
So I posted a link to my blog in the chat. That has the slides. It has a longer recording of this, which I basically say the same thing, and the actual usability test if you want to watch it yourself.